What is up, everybody? So if you're easily triggered by hearing people talk about depression, suicide, trauma, things like that, you definitely don't want to watch this video. But if you're somebody that struggles with depression, suicidal thoughts, or you know somebody that's like that, I think that we can actually learn from the situation that's happening with Pete Davidson right now and help turn a very sad situation into something that's good in the sense of we can learn from it.
Help!
Here's the Instagram post. And having struggled with suicidal thoughts and somebody who's been depressed many times, in fact, I was depressed for years at one point in time. This is really tough for me to read because I've been where he's at in terms of feeling how he's feeling. I really don't want to be on this earth anymore. I'm doing my best to stay here for you, but I actually don't know how much longer I can last. All I've ever tried to do is help people. Just remember, I told you so. So there's a few things that I want to point out in this. This is serious. Like, anytime that somebody talks about suicide or saying that they don't value their life anymore, you need to take notice and you need to suggest immediately that they get professional help and take that serious every time. Don't ever assume that maybe it's a cry for attention or that it's a joke, because more often than not, if they're to the place where they're talking about this openly, it's legitimate. And they're crying out for help because they know that they have a problem, but they just don't know how to deal with it. And sometimes depression and suicidal thoughts are due to the accumulation of trauma, which is whenever we're overwhelmed and we can't cope with it. And that would make perfect sense in the situation with Pete Davidson, although I'm sure there are multiple factors, but he's had a lot of trauma. You may have heard of the recent situation with the former Navy SEAL Dan Crenshaw, which Pete Davidson pretty much made fun of because he wears an eye patch. But the problem is that the eye patch is because Dan Crenshaw had his eye blown out by an IED in Iraq. This is like a lieutenant commander in the Navy. He got 2 Bronze Stars, a Purple Heart. So anyway, it really upset a lot of people because these are people that are fighting for our safety and for our country. But nonetheless, it was really amazing. Dan Crenshaw and Pete Davidson went live on the air on SNL, shook hands, and made up. And it was amazing and beautiful. Okay, I don't know much about Pete Davidson, but when you've got millions and millions of people suddenly hating you, I mean, we're talking about your career being in jeopardy. We're talking about social alienation. I mean, that's like a major trauma, all right? And even though he made the joke and kind of acted like everything was fine, I'm thinking that that really got to him, and rightly so. And then you take the Ariana Grande situation. Like, I don't know how serious that relationship was, but a breakup is a major trauma in your life. And that's something that takes time to process. And one of the things that I believe is happening is Pete Davidson has not given himself enough time to process the major traumas that have happened in his life. I think that the appropriate response with everything that's happened that I'm even aware of, I'm sure that there's probably much more things that we don't even see in the public limelight, is for him to take some time off. I think that to keep yourself in the public limelight after everything that he's gone through while battling with depression and suicidal thoughts is just asking to remain overwhelmed. And one of the worst things that we can do whenever we're experiencing psychological trauma is to deny it. And whenever you just do everything as normal and act like you don't need to give yourself time to process what's happening, it's going to cause the trauma to get stored in your emotions. There may be even tension that starts to get stored in your body. Psychologically, you're going to start to embrace feelings of hopelessness. There's all sorts of things that happen, and I know this because I've done that so many times. I didn't take the time to process the trauma that was happening in my life. And guess what happened? I was walking around an emotional wreck. I was easily triggered, and it led to be so bad that I didn't want to live anymore. So what are the positives of what we can learn from this situation that Pete Davidson is actually doing correctly? He's reaching out to people, okay? this was actually great. I'm so thankful that he made that Instagram post. I mean, how many times do we see celebrities that commit suicide and they never tell anybody? Chester, I think it's Bennington from Linkin Park. That was like one of my favorite bands. I guess not, because I don't even know the dude's name. But nonetheless, he didn't reach out to anybody. And that was one of the huge disappointments with the fans and with the people that loved him is, bro, like, why didn't you say anything? Like, why didn't you reach out for help? Why didn't you make a post about it or reach out to a professional or get with a friend or something? So as far as Pete Davidson reaching out and letting the world know, that was right. That's what you need to do. You need to tell somebody that is in a good mental state that's going to help you in your bad mental state. We don't need to isolate because we're not in a proper mental state to make the best decisions whenever we're depressed and suicidal. So we need to just admit that and surround ourselves with people that can hold us accountable and also remind us of how valuable we are. And we need to develop a rule in our life that if we get to the point where we're thinking of making a permanent decision off of a temporary circumstance, that we just delegate our lives to other people, professionals, friends, and family that are going to basically manage our lives for us until we can properly manage it for ourselves. What is Pete Davidson doing that is not the right thing to do? He's not taking a break from this national, international platform that is putting too much pressure on him and taking a break to get healthy mentally, physically, spiritually, emotionally. One of my mentors is always telling me the best gift that you can give to the world is a healthy you. In my opinion, which take it or leave it, is that Pete Davidson needs to accept that being on SNL is too much right now, and he needs to take some time away and get with a professional and get himself healthy, because he has a gift of comedy. Whether we think he's funny or not, he's got talents and abilities that the world is going to be helped by. And also he's helping raise awareness of mental health. But most importantly, he's a valuable human being, and he needs to respect that process of taking the time to process trauma. But if he's not willing to do that, I think SNL needs to force him to take that time. And yes, that could lead to more trauma in his life, but the alternative is him continuing on like everything is normal, like he's not struggling with what he's going through, and that could also be detrimental. But the takeaway for you who are watching this is, if you go through a major trauma in your life, or maybe it's repeated low-level trauma, things that build up and eventually you're overwhelmed and you can't cope with it, you need to give yourself time. You need to lay aside anything that you can that is adding additional stress that's not going to put you in the right state to be able to process what you're going through. Also, if you feel suicidal or if you're depressed, you need to reach out to somebody immediately, a mental health professional. In addition, you need to surround yourself with friends and family. Find somebody that's going to encourage you and remind you of who you are, and that what you're going through is going to be temporary, even though you feel like it's going to be permanent.